Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. I am MagMongoSlade. Today we're going to talk about updates from the Vince McMahon criminal investigation. Vince said it's over. His attorney, Robert W. Allen, said that it's over. But there is an appellate court decision that came out on Friday that accuses Jerry McDevitt and Vince McMahon of wrongdoing. So I'm going to have to explain some things. And I'm going to try to give you an overview. Sometimes people get a little bored when you read all these things all the way through. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give you at least my understanding of what is occurring in this criminal case. Okay? And I'm going to give you, where I can, citations. All right? So for starters, I did read the appellate court decision. I read it. It's 44 pages. And I read the thing. Okay? I also read the New York Post article. I also read, an F4W, which would be Meltzer's site. I read that site as well. So I want to give you a quick rundown of the criminal investigation. And then we'll get into what this means for the lawsuit. I'm going to try to be as dispassionate as I can and keep things as even as I possibly can. Okay, so it's pretty simple. Vince McMahon is being accused of financial crimes, not sex trafficking, financial crimes. They believe, the government did, that Vince McMahon, along with Jerry McDevitt, had negotiated these two agreements in 2019 and 2022. The 2019 agreement was for $7.5 million. It was from a talent that worked in WWE between 2004 and 2005. This talent claimed that Vince McMahon forcefully kissed her and obtained forced oral sex from her. And that was $7.5 million. Then there's the $3 million settlement, which happened in 2022, which is the Janelle Grant lawsuit. That is the lawsuit that is alleging that Vince McMahon engaged in sex trafficking. There is no sex trafficking in this criminal case. All right. There is no sex trafficking. He was never under investigation for sex trafficking. What he was under investigation for was whether Vince McMahon broke the law in dealing with these allegations. Basically, he paid these settlements out. He did not tell WWE, and did that rise to the level of criminality? That's the point that we're trying to get here. Did Vince McMahon try to purposefully cover up that he paid out $10.5 million in hush money? Okay. Now, the appellate court decision is not making an argument about whether that was true or false, or his guilt or innocence. The appellate court, their job is to review the decision of other courts. All right. Basically, they're the referees. All right. If you have a problem with your judge, you go to the appellate court, and the appellate court looks at the judge's decision and says yay or nay. So in this situation, the appellate court is looking at a specific decision that was made. When the Southern District of New York, who is the prosecutor's office, when they requested documents from Vince McMahon and Jerry McDevitt, Vince McMahon and Jerry McDevitt turned over those documents. But Jerry McDevitt claimed 208 of the documents were attorney-client privilege. And as attorney-client privilege, he should not have to share them. He withheld those documents. Okay? Now, the Southern District of New York went to their district court judge and said, we have ex parte, that means off the record, conversations between Vince McMahon and Jerry McDevitt, where Jerry McDevitt is telling Vince how to avoid having to disclose these documents. Now, how is he doing that? Well, they claimed that they had information that Jerry McDevitt was telling Vince to talk about the settlements through personal text rather than through email, because somebody else might find out about it. And the court said, the district court said, that's probable cause that these documents could be concealing crime or fraud. Now, the appellate court is looking for something like that. Okay. Now, Jerry McDevitt, once he's told by the district court he has to turn over those 208 documents, he did so under protest, right? So he turned those documents over in about, I think they said June of 2024. All right. Once those documents were turned over, he still appealed the district court decision that made him have to turn them over in the first place. That's what the appellate court is looking at. All right. The appellate court is looking at whether that judge, the district court judge, made the right decision in forcing Jerry McDevitt and Vince McMahon to break attorney-client privilege and turn over 208 documents. All right. The appellate court decided that the district court judge made the right decision. That's it. It's not about whether Vince is guilty or innocent. It only says that the district court judge who made them break attorney-client privilege did not act inappropriately. That it was a sound judicial and legal decision. That's all it's saying. All right. 44 pages. That's all it says. So when you see people doing these shows talking about this case, all it boils down to is very, very simple. Jerry McDevitt and Vince McMahon did not want to turn over 208 documents, believing that those documents were attorney-client privilege. They turned those documents over anyway, but then appealed the decision. But they lost the appeal. But they lost the appeal in February. Those documents had been turned over in June. All right. So it even says it in the appeals court decision that Jerry McDevitt turned over the documents once his motion was overruled by the district court. So he argued with the district court that he shouldn't have to turn these documents over. He was overruled, and so he turned them over. So everybody who's trying to act like Jerry McDevitt is trying to hide something, no. He did a simple legal tactic. I should not have to, tell the court or tell anybody, expose any third party to what me and my client was talking about. And the judge says, well, we think that it might be criminal, so they need to take a look at it just to see if it's criminal or not. All right. So now here it is, February. And Vince McMahon and his attorney, his new attorney, Robert W. Allen, are both claiming that this investigation is over. All right. Now, there's still a ton of dirt sheet writers who are flittering about, pretending that this thing is not over, because the Southern District of New York will not in any way admit that it's over. And that's actually typical of a prosecutor's office. They will not tell you that it's over, right? Because they always want to keep the options open. They didn't lose the case. It seems like they voluntarily dropped it. Now, why did they voluntarily drop it? Well, they voluntarily dropped it because Vince McMahon entered a settlement with the SEC. Do you remember this? This was January the 10th when he went to when the SEC came to him, and he didn't have to admit any wrongdoing, but he did have to admit that he should have disclosed these two settlements to the WWE, which everybody already admitted that he should have told the WWE about these things. So they fined him $400,000 and said he had to pay WWE $1.3 million. After that settlement with the SEC was filed, the Southern District of New York dropped their case. So on February the 11th, the New York Post drops an article where Vince McMahon's attorney says that the grand jury brought back no indictment of Vince McMahon. Now let's go to the New York Post real quick. It said the Second Circuit Court of Appeals decision suggests that the case is still active, but McMahon's lawyer Robert W. Allen, a former Manhattan federal prosecutor, stressed Wednesday that the prosecutors have ended the probe without asking the grand jury to bring an indictment against him. Allen says, quote, "This is simply the result of an appeal of a procedural matter that was argued 5 months ago. We have been in consistent communication with the government since that time and understand with no ambiguity that the investigation has definitively concluded and will not result in charges. If you read the appeals court decision, you will see at around May of 2024 is when they started having these discussions about these documents. All right. And what I mean by these documents, I mean by the attorney-client privilege documents, the ones that Jerry McDevitt is saying he should not have to turn over. They started having this conversation in May, right? And then they find out that in June, that the probable cause was found, and he turned those documents over. But he still appealed the decision. And he just now getting the decision. That's all it is. Right? And again, all the appellate court is looking at is whether the district court behaved appropriately. And he found that they did. So he had to turn those documents over. Done and done. The order was not defied. There was no wrongdoing. There was no wrongdoing. All the court is saying is that Jerry McDevitt should have turned those documents over initially, along with the rest of the documents. But he thought he could claim attorney-client privilege on those documents. That's all it is. It's not like he was hiding them under the bed. He told them that he had 208 documents that he was claiming attorney-client privilege on. He told them that. And that's why they asked for them. So that wasn't even a secret. They didn't keep anything secret. And then they turned these things over even before the appellate court told them to. So when they say that the decision is that the case has been dropped, from everything that I'm looking at, I don't see how it can't be. Now, there were certain facts and evidence that were not in dispute. One of those things that was not in dispute is Vince McMahon did not embezzle the money. He paid the money out of his own pocket. But one of the problems that the appellate court found is that when Vince signed for these agreements, he signed for both himself and for WWE without specifying where the money was going to come from. So he agreed to pay the woman, $7.5 million. He signed for himself and he signed for WWE. And then he never told anybody who was going to pay, whether it was going to be him or whether it was going to be WWE. A second thing that he did was that when he drafted the document, the NDA, he wanted WWE to also be excluded from any sort of claims of, legal issues or whatever, in addition to himself. So he put WWE in the middle of his personal thing so that the woman couldn't say, well, I can't sue you, but I can sue WWE. He just lumped WWE in with him, basically as if him and the company are one and the same, right? He can't do that. And that's really all it boiled down to, is that there was weak internal controls that prevented him from doing something like that. That's what the appellate court was talking about in the later part of the document that gets really, really boring, right? Basically, that Vince didn't have anybody watching over him, watching what kind of money he was spending, or he just could have signed this shit for himself, but that would, of course, would have left the company open to being sued by these women or whatever. All right? Now, another important thing that the appellate court actually put in the footnotes is that it's not the appellate court's job to decide guilt or innocence, or even if there is sufficient evidence to launch a criminal investigation. Their job is simply to look at the decisions of the courts. That is it. There are some other little nuggets in here in the appellate court decision that pops out at people. For instance, that there was knowledge by at least 2 WWE employees of certain facts of these agreements, but these people were not aware fully of who was going to be party to them, and plus they were not in WWE legal or in WWE's accounting. So there were people in WWE who knew about these NDAs, but they didn't work in the legal department and they didn't work in the accounting department. So of course there's going to be a bunch of people trying to figure out who they are. But I don't think it's relevant because again, there's no criminal case. So now all we're talking about is money. So now that all we're talking about is money, we gotta backtrack a little bit. Now a lot of people are going to say, Mongo, Vince McMahon, he's Teflon. He's getting away with this thing because of Trump. Well, yes and no. I'm going to lean mostly towards no. In November of 2024, Damian Williams, who was the United States attorney, the prosecutor for the Southern District of New York, he resigned. So between November and December, that was his last couple of weeks in office, right? Vince McMahon announced that this thing was over January the 10th. Vince McMahon agreed, settled his case with the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, January the 10th. If this criminal case was dropped, at some point, which the article says between September and January, we're looking at it being more towards January, right? Because this guy, this Democrat, this Biden appointee, he dropped out in December. Just literally 3 weeks later or something like that, the SEC makes a deal with Vince and it's over. So the Security and Exchange Commission makes their settlement with Vince, which was probably negotiated during the time that, Damian Williams was there, and it's over. They have nothing to prosecute at this point. They were only looking into the allegations of whether Vince McMahon, mishandled funds, was engaging in embezzlement or something like that, which he admitted that he wasn't, and he had paid for it out of his own pocket. That turned out to be true. Then you also had them looking into whether he was trying to circumvent the internal controls and the internal accounting of WWE to a criminal degree, which the court found that he did circumvent these folks by signing for WWE, and he did not disclose that he had signed these agreements, but it didn't ride to the point of he needs to go to prison, right? So they made him pay a fine and that was it. Okay, done and done, right? The criminal element of this is over. There should be no reason for this thing to continue. So now all we got is these people who think sex trafficking, because it sounds sexy, is a thing. All right? It's ridiculous. Here, let's go into the New York Post article. It says the Wall Street Journal first broke the news in February 2024 that federal prosecutors were eyeing McMahon and had interviewed more than one of his accusers. The newspaper reported that the feds were looking into allegations of quote-unquote sexual assault and sex trafficking. But Friday's ruling, which does not mention sex trafficking, indicates that the probe focused instead on whether McMahon broke the law by covering up the allegations. So we're led to believe all they were looking into was the financial crimes, not sex trafficking. Once again, sex trafficking sounds oh so sexy for your headlines, but it's not real. Vince McMahon on January the 10th tweeted out, "The case is closed. Today ends nearly 3 years of investigation by different governmental agencies. There has been a great deal of speculation about what exactly the government was investigating and what the outcome would be. As today's resolution shows, much of that speculation was misguided and misleading. In the end, there was never anything more to this than minor accounting errors with regard to some personal payments that I made several years ago while I was CEO of WWE. I'm thrilled that I can now put all of this behind me." His exact words were, "There has been a great deal of speculation about what exactly the government was investigating and what the outcome would be." Meaning, a lot of people who are doing a lot of talking didn't even know that the government was not looking into sex trafficking. There's even people doing interviews and stuff right now as I speak who still thinks sex trafficking is a thing that he was being investigated for. It was not. And the interesting bit is this. He said that he was under investigation by different governmental agencies. So not just the Southern District of New York, but the SEC was involved too, right? There was other governmental agencies. If there was evidence of sex trafficking, they had 3 years to find it. They had his personal computer. They had his phone. They had his work computer. They had his attorney's information. They took information from him and Jerry McDevitt. All right? Information that usually would be attorney-client privilege. They even had that stuff. And they still could not find any evidence of sex trafficking. Okay? Now, you can't poo-poo the financial crimes because that's still pretty bad. But it's not sex trafficking. It's nowhere near sex trafficking. It's nowhere near rape. It's nowhere near that stuff. So, am I surprised that on February the 1st, Ann Callis puts out a new version of that same lawsuit where she's naming names and going into more detail to be more salacious and spicier? No, because it was pretty clear to me that something had gone wrong that she knew about, and she was doubling down because she needed the help. And that's what happened. She put out this spicier amended complaint with more names being dropped. She's putting Brock Lesnar's name in it. She's got Michael Hayes' name all up in it. All this kind of stuff, right? All to obscure the fact that Vince McMahon was under investigation for 3 years by different government agencies. And the only crime that they could find was that he failed to disclose these documents. That's it. Now, if you want to say, he's connected with Trump and all that kind of stuff, you got to explain why he wasn't arrested in like June of last year, long before Trump even got in office. Why wasn't he arrested, in September before the guy quit? There's so much time in between when these allegations became public and today that he could have been arrested for sex trafficking or any other crime, and he wasn't. So I believe that the government is, incompetent to a degree. But I also, understand that the government is politically motivated. And Vince McMahon is one of those guys that the government would be politically motivated to bring down. Why? Because he's close with Trump. His wife was working with Trump during the first Trump administration, and she's still involved with it now. She's involved with the second Trump administration too. So if you can take Donald Trump's friends and allies and align them with anything like rape or sex trafficking or jaywalking or terrorism or whatever the fuck, you were motivated to do that in 2024. And still, here it is, 2025, Vince McMahon is not in prison. So that has to stand for something. Maybe you could say he bought his way out of it. Okay, sure, maybe. But if there was substantial evidence that he was sex trafficking, Ann Callis wouldn't be fighting this thing so hard in the media. And she didn't even have a comment after, she usually always has a comment. When the Netflix documentary came out, Ann Callis had a comment. When Vince McMahon said that his case was over, Ann Callis had a comment. But today, she didn't have a comment. Nope. She ain't had nothing to say. Interesting. Now, I'm of this opinion. I'm going to get into my opinion part now. I was as dispassionate as I could for the first 20 some odd minutes of this. Vince McMahon needs to settle this Janelle Grant case. I get it. He's flush with cash. He probably wants to fight it. He's been humiliated. All of his kinks and all this kind of stuff has been spread out over the media. I'm of the opinion that if you send people private messages, it's between you and them. And these things are always going to be embarrassing. I would be absolutely embarrassed too if me sexting with somebody was spread all over the internet. All right. It's embarrassing. No matter how kinky it is or how gross it may be, it's not meant for public consumption. One of the worst things people can do is spread your private stuff all over the internet. And that's what she's doing. She's just using the courts to do it, right? It's Vince McMahon's best, absolute best advice to just pay this girl to go away. If for nothing else. That whether it goes to arbitration or whether it goes to a public court, it's not good for his grandchildren. The longer this thing goes on, it's not good for his grandchildren. He's got 2 grandsons in college. I think Stephanie and Triple H may have a daughter in high school. They certainly have one in middle school. You know, they might even have a kid in college too. You don't want your grandchildren every other day popping up with this stuff. And it's gross shit too. Your granddad was talking about all this stuff with this young lady, okay? Because she's going to hide in the shadows, and the internet's going to do a great job of protecting her. You know, they've done a great job. There's no recent pictures of Janelle Grant. Every picture that you have of Janelle Grant is the one she put out there, okay? You don't even know what she looks like. You could probably walk past her in the street. You don't know what she looks like at this point. They're protecting her. They're not protecting Vince. They're dragging Vince through the fucking mud. You understand what I'm saying? And there's no way to beat this case. He might not go to prison, but this thing is going to be on his record forever. And the more of this information that becomes public, the more damage that's being done to WWE, which he might not care about that anymore because he's been forced out of it. But they just drag more and more people in. And that seems to be the Ann Callis way of doing things, is if she starts to sort of slip, she's going to drag somebody else in it. You know, you already dragged in John Laurinaitis. Now we're going to drag in Brock Lesnar. Now we're going to drag in Michael Hayes. Next thing you know, they're going to be dragging in Mean Gene Okerlund or some shit like that. Look, this is always about money. That's what this is about. This is about money. Give the girl the money, Vince, and end this thing. All right? Even if you go to court and you win, you still don't win, because now everything you ever said to this girl is going to be public. Everything. And you don't really win in a civil case anyway. It's hard to win a civil case. It is. Because the standards are so low. It is very hard to win a civil case if you're accused of like rape or something like that. That's why people go with, you know, rape and civil cases, because the standards are so low. It's still a jury of your peers, or a judge with, all the powers and duties therein. But the standard is so much lower. Beyond a reasonable doubt is the standard for a criminal case. It's not the standard for a civil case. The standard is so low that you can be convicted off tweets. You can be, like you can lose $100 million because you sent this girl a freaky text message. You better off just giving the girl whatever she wants. If she wants $10 million, give it to her and walk away. He has a huge war chest. He's got maybe another 10 years or something like that of life left in him. Why waste even one more moment of that time with these deranged idiots screaming about sex trafficking and refuse to accept that there was no fucking sex trafficking? And I think that this proves it. Because if they were looking into sex trafficking, why wouldn't the appellate court be talking about sex trafficking? They weren't. Because that's not what they were looking into. Why would they drop the sex trafficking case just because he admitted to some financial crimes? It wouldn't. They wouldn't. He is more of a juicy steak politically than Diddy is. Yes, Diddy is probably more high profile, but he's closer to Trump. McMahon is. And you definitely could have done a great deal of damage to Linda McMahon through Vince, which is, likely why she never became a senator or something like that in the first place, is because of Vince. He's better off protecting his grandchildren, taking the L, and letting this whole thing go. But as it stands right now, Vince McMahon is free and clear. He's likely going to just now focus on the civil case, because the criminal case seems to be over. Like, share, subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later.
Tell me what's worse than learning all that you led to believe was all horse crap. They distort, so question as if you worship.